There's always something that pops up there. I'd like to welcome everybody back to Alabama Care. Today we have Dr. Doris Hill, the Director of the Regional Autism Network in Auburn University, and Mrs. Maria Gutierrez, a Family Navigator at the Regional Autism Network and the Hispanic Training and Resources Advocacy Network. And at this point, I'd like to hand it over. Dr. Hill, if you would introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dr. Doris Hill, and I'm an associate research professor at Auburn University. I'm a board certified behavior analyst. My background is in special education, and I'm the director of the Regional Autism Network. I'm also one of the primary investigators, along with Dr. Christine Drew, on a grant from the Alabama Council on Developmental Disabilities to work with Spanish-speaking families impacted by developmental disability.
Thank you for being. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, you wanted to know the history of the regional network, correct?
Yes, ma'am. If you could give us a little bit of background, exactly what is RAN, and then some of the history.
You go.
I know. I was just going to say, if you could give a little bit of background about what RAN is, and then some of the history, how it got started.
Okay. Well, Maria will tell you, and I will tell you, I moved here from Florida, where there are a lot of resources for autism and at the state level. And Maria moved here from California, and the same thing applied. When I moved here to Alabama, there wasn't anything close to what a regional autism network would be. There was the Autism Society of Alabama, which consists of advocates across the state. That's a parent-led organization. So the Riley Ward Act, Cam Ward was a senator from Alabama. He introduced the Riley Ward Act in honor of his daughter in 2009. And that was when the Alabama Interagency Autism Coordinating Council was founded. It had very, very little resources, but it was a way for professionals and parents to come together and try to advocate for more resources in the state. And so, and it was modeled after for the CARD, Center for Autism and Related Disabilities in Florida. But they had this much money and we had this much. So we continued to work toward getting funding for a regional autism network and insurance reform for ABA, applied behavior analysis therapies, behavioral therapies for kids with autism. So from 2009 to 2017 is what, 8 years? 8 years later, we had just a little bit of funding for the regional network and insurance reform for companies that have over 50 employees to provide insurance for behavioral therapy. So that was a change for good, but there still wasn't anything for Medicaid recipients. And it was in 2019 that that Medicaid now funds
We'll provide that service.
Yes.
Pay for that.
So
service.
It's been a long road trying to get this, especially in the rural communities and schools that don't have a lot of resources, to try to get the interventions for these kids across the state. And yeah, so that's how the Regional Autism Network came to be. There are 5 of them now, one at UAH, one at UAB, Auburn, University of Alabama, and University of South Alabama. So we have 5 regional autism networks. And I guess it was about 3 years ago, I had enough funds. I try to be a good steward to hire a family navigator, because that was the piece we were missing. Each one of the RANs are directed by a professional, has a background in special ed, and have worked with individuals with autism, whether they be social workers, educators, behavior analysts, speech language pathologists. But we were able to fund Maria as a family navigator, and now all the RANs are working toward hiring family navigators. And we actually got a little bit of additional funding. So that's kind of our history. Have any other questions regarding our history?
No, I thank you for walking us through that. And it sounds like really in the last 16 years is when autism has started to get the services and support in Alabama that have needed to be there. And so now you mentioned, we're going to do an introduction for Mrs. Gutierrez. You mentioned that she is the family navigator. Maria, if you would introduce yourself.
Hello, Alex, and thank you for inviting us. My name is Maria Gutierrez. I am the parent of a young adult on the autism spectrum, and we moved from California almost 11 years ago. So, I am the family navigator of the Regional Autism Network, region number 4. So we are actually the largest region of the state. We cover 20 counties. So, I always feeling very honored to have had this opportunity to be working along with Dr. Hill and other professionals to try to provide services for the families that are impacted by autism and developmental disabilities.
Yeah, thank you both for being with us here today. And why is it so important that there is a family navigator in the Regional Autism Network?
Well, if you ask me, I believe that it's so important that families get to be connected with somebody that has walked the mile, right? Family navigators tend to be people that have experience being the caretakers of an individual or a person with a disability. And it provides the other parents that are kind of new to the disability world, with emotional support, with help them to navigate systems, whether it's the school system or the healthcare system, and connect them with the resources that are available in the community. As a parent, because you have lived certain experiences, you are able to relate, and parents sometimes they need that extra support. They know that, okay, well, you understand me, whereas as a professional, sometimes they could be like, well, yeah, he or she is the professional, but do they really understand what we're going through as a family unit?
Yeah, I feel like there can be a little bit of a difference from maybe some of the tests that are taking place in in hospitals, and then how that relates to the parents there. And it's almost like a peer-to-peer support network that the family navigator is able to do. And I imagine, Mrs. Gutierrez, that oftentimes you're educating individuals and families, but also kind of counseling and almost being a therapist, because you've been through the steps, and that helps the families and the parents maybe trust the process a little bit more.
Well, every family, when they get the official diagnosis of their loved one, is going to react different, right? There are some families that they might not be ready to gather all this information, being bombarded almost, and there are others that are like craving it, like, please just give me as much information as possible. I am ready. So I always talk to the professional, said, you need to meet the family where they are. Some families, they might just call you because they have certain concerns, frustrations, and fears. Others, they want to learn right away, what can I do to help my individual? What else should I need to tap into? What resources are available here? Where should I go and get to be learning more about the disability of my child, or my care, or the person that I am responsible for? And yes, there are times where, I had to get the privilege to work with the families and listen their concerns, and try to help them, guide them to the best of my abilities to how to navigate whatever area they are working on, so that they could also recognize their own strengths, because I always said, nobody knows your child better than you. And so sometimes it's just a matter of reinforcing that on the family and letting them know, like, you are the best advocate for your child. You need to just learn how to use the lingo, because all this is new for families. And so it takes a while for them to be familiarized. But once they feel comfortable, they start moving forward. And then you see those changes.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of times when I started learning more about my family member and, helping her navigate the disability community, there was quite a bit of jargon, or, even like HTRAN. You see a lot of those types of things where everything's condensed and you're like, I have so many things coming at me. How do I learn this? And it takes time. But the investment that you make in that will pay off long-term for your family and for your child. And I have met families that are probably more like, give me all that information now. We want to get in the system now. And others are a little bit more stand backish. And then when their child is a little bit older, they say, okay, now we're ready to start taking advantage of some of these services. And that goes to speak on what you said, is you got to meet the family where they are and let them feel confidence there, educate them, let them feel confidence, and help them through that process. Now, I want to throw a little bit of a curveball question here. You both came to Alabama from different states. You're not originally both from Alabama. And in the time that you've been in Alabama, you've done a lot of advocacy and put a lot of support behind some things that weren't getting it at the time. And that seems to be a reoccurring thing here in Alabama, especially in the disability community, is that we kind of are catching up with other states. Why do you think that is?
Oh, that is an interesting question. Maria looks like she has an answer, at least to start with, and I'll process for a second.
Okay, I think it's a matter of having more funding, right? In order to create programs that are so needed in the state of Alabama. And we have made tremendous progress, at least in the years that I have been here. Initially, I live in California for a long time, and I work for the Family Focused Resource and Empowerment Center, part of the California State Northridge University, CSUN. And I work as a parent mentor. So it's basically what I'm doing here, but I was under that agency. And what I noticed is that, when somebody handed you a diagnosis.
Oh, we got a little bit of a interruption there. We'll give her just a few seconds here to jump back in. She was talking about, her experience in California, being kind of a family advocate there and helping. There we go. Sorry, Mrs. Gutierrez, you cut out for a second there.
Oh, I'm sorry. So can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so which agencies are the ones that are going to be able to assist you in the process of being educated? Like here in Alabama, we have APEC, Alabama Parent Education Center. So it's connecting the families with those organizations, with ADAP. And, being a parent mentor provides you with that extra knowledge, that I didn't even know that I had it. I just knew that I needed to be educated, that I needed to learn. And the first step was for me to join a support group in California. And I started learning, about special education law, about Medicaid, what are my child's rights? Okay, how can I actually learn things so that I could be able to speak and have a more active role during the IEP meetings? How do I communicate my concerns with the school? What other supports are out there in the community? And so through that process, I got to be educated by other parents that were my mentors. And eventually I got to be hired as a family mentor for the Family Focused Resource Empowerment Center in California. Then we decided to move to Alabama. And when we moved to Alabama, and I was trying to look for those resources that we had back home, it was hard. It was very challenging because I couldn't find them right away. Some they were not existent in existence. And so I remember calling Auburn University because I Googled it and I was like, okay, what resources do we have here in Lee County? And it popped out that there was Auburn University and the autism group. And so I remember calling Dr. Hill, she answered the phone and I talked to her and I said, I just moved from California and I cannot find anything about autism. So she was able to connect me with other parents that were gathering together, as a support group. And I remember going to the meeting and I came with my list of questions like, where do you have access to a respite care? Who's your respite care provider? Which agency provides it in Lee County? How do I access social skills for my child? How do I have access to learn more about what other organizations are here in Alabama? And I remember that a lot of the families that were attending the support group, didn't know what I was talking about, especially when it came to respite and when it came for adaptive skills and ABA. And so that to me was a shock because I didn't realize that we were so far behind here in Alabama. So after meeting other parents, we got together and I told them, well, what is what you guys do? And they were like, we get together, we talk, and I'm like, but we need to be educating parents. So a group of 5 parents, 4 mothers and 1 grandmother, we got together. We decided to form a nonprofit organization called Lee County Autism Resource and Advocacy. And it was an all-volunteer nonprofit organization in the Lee County area that we were trying to help the families affected by autism in order to provide services for the families, whether it was educational programs, social skill programs, summer camps, opportunities for the families. And during this time, we collaborated with a lot of local organizations like APEC, ADAP, Auburn University, kinesiology department, in order to provide those services for the families and try to bridge the gap because there was nothing.
Mhm.
And so that was, I did that for about 6 years. During the last couple of years, we were funded through United Way in order for us to have a space and to cover those administrative costs. But then, then the run came up. And so we were always collaborating with Dr. Hill, and she will come and present for our families. And, eventually we started to grow and be invited to come and talk as a nonprofit organization, going to Mobile, going here, going there. And so we decided that it was best for us to close that nonprofit organization. And at that time I said, well, I'm still going to be helping. But then Dr. Hill said, hey, why don't you come? I know that you are not done. So why don't you come and join me? And I apply, and I am very honored to have been hired. And now, I have this opportunity to get to meet so many families out there. Have we reached out to 20 counties? Not yet. We're working, then COVID happened, but we are working, trying to reach out to those families that we have, that they are out there.
You brought up a few things for me. I'd like to kind of ask, and then Dr. Hill, I'll ask the same question to you. First, you reminded me of finding your crew. So you have to go and you have to start getting involved, and you have to find other families that are in the same process as you. And you have to really find your crew to feel comfortable there, find your peer support. But then also when learning about all these things, it hits me as kind of like a part-time job, or even sometimes a full-time job, just learning about what's out there and what's the best course for you or for your family or for your children, anything like that. So it does take a decent amount of time. And then you kind of hit on the funding there, that we need more funding for these organizations to serve individuals and families, but that ultimately trickles down to the advocacy of the community, of the parents and the individuals and the families, knowing their rights and their resources and advocating for those at a greater level. So it kind of falls back on our shoulders as Alabamians to really take the opportunity to learn what's out there, learn some of the things that need to be there, and then take that and voice those things. Dr. Hill, now you moved from Florida to Alabama. Is there anything that you see sometimes why Alabama lags behind other states in the disability community?
Well, as I said, part of that was the insurance issue. And a lot of the board certified behavior analysts would leave the state to go where there was insurance. So unless you were near flagpoles as a behavior analyst, such as military installations that had the exceptional family member program and TRICARE insurance that would cover the therapies, or you were at a university, that's why I say flagpoles, then you really had to do everything for yourself out of pocket. And there weren't a lot of resources to even contact. So with our charge, we provide direct assistance to families one-on-one. We connect them to resources. We do technical assistance and consultation. So we connect not only the families to the professionals, but the professionals to each other. And then we do trainings. We present at conferences. We did trainings this summer through the State Department of Education for teachers via Zoom. And we also do public awareness events like resource fairs and things like that in our 20 counties.
And that's kind of, hoping to get that information out there and connect all individuals or all all playmakers in that ecosystem. As you mentioned, professionals with parents, professionals with individuals, professionals with professionals, parents with parents, those types of connections. I do want to clarify with the insurance, you mentioned one big thing was the insurance approving some autism therapy. And before that, was it say, let's say I'm employed here in the state and then I have a child that has autism, my insurance wouldn't cover that. And now it does.
Yes.
And so I might have been in the position where the resources that I have couldn't cover what my son or daughter needed. So I had to move out of state where another insurance would cover that and my child could receive those services.
Yes.
And so now we have that, but that was just kind of recent in the past, is it 10 years, you said, 15?
Well, 2017 is when insurance reform was passed. And you asked how I was teaching in Florida, a special ed teacher, and I had a self-contained classroom, and probably 8 of the 9 children in my classroom had autism and significant behavior challenges. So I went through I went back to school and got my board certification through Florida Technical University. And I got my BCBA and passed the national board. And then I decided, I had my GI Bill. So I came to Auburn to get my PhD and found out that Auburn didn't have anything, basically. I mean, there was an autism center, but that was for placement for elementary school special ed teachers, and they had a limited number of children that they could serve. So, yeah, I was just like, I was flummoxed, I guess you'd say, because I'd ask the same questions Maria did. And in Florida, we had assistive technology teams. They had the card centers. They had meetings every month for parents, and they would send flyers to the school, and I would send them home with the kids. So I just kind of learned it as I went. And it was like, I was just amazed when we came here, and there wasn't much of anything.
I think there are a lot of parents in Alabama that are very grateful that you are here, Dr. Hill and Mrs. Gutierrez, in Alabama to kind of kickstart a lot of this momentum for autism. I know it's been kind of lagging in the background as far as services that are available for individuals. So through the Regional Autism Network, let's talk a little bit about specific things that families can expect are available once their son or daughter is diagnosed with autism and kind of in the early years there.
Well, I will say one of the first things is just getting the diagnosis, because there's a waiting list generally.
What does that look like? Are there tests there, or what is that? Autism Diagnostic Observation Schedule is the gold standard for evaluating a child for autism. It takes about an hour, and there's different depending on the child's age, depending on their disability level. Are they verbal? Are they nonverbal? There's different pieces of the test that you use. I'm sorry. A lot of parents would take their kids to private doctors and pay for the evaluation. But if you were a parent waiting to go to the University of South Alabama or the clinic at UAB, you generally had to wait. What would you say back when we got here, Maria? At least a year?
Yes.
And that's valuable time lost, because we talk about all these early intervention services and how if we get there, the sooner we get there, the bigger the dividend is long-term over the lifetime.
Right.
Teaching those skills young. I'd like to take a little bit of a step further back. Don't know a lot about autism. Have there been any reasons why does autism exist? Are there things that happen in pregnancy? For instance, my family member, we believe her mother, my grandmother, had German measles when she was pregnant. And that when she was sick, it had some effects on her daughter, my aunt. But are there things that some people may be asking, how does this happen?
Well, there's likely a genetic link, but they still don't know the cause for autism. But they say it's likely a genetic link. There's 4 to 5 times as many boys as girls that present with autism. And also the DSM Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, it has changed several times through the years, and the autism diagnostic criteria has changed a little bit. Like it used to have Asperger's, now it's just autism, and depending on how much support you need. But the deficits are in communication, behavior, and social interaction. Did I miss anything, Maria?
Language. sometimes.
Language, yeah.
So it still feels like we're kind of early in the autism journey of what we know and how we best support there. We're still working as a community across the nation, across the globe, to learn how to better support individuals with autism. So,
And they connected autism to the vaccines at one point, and that was debunked. The researcher faked the data and he lost his license. I just wanted to say that because there's nothing behind that.
I think that's a very important thing to say, especially during the times we have now with COVID and the vaccinations and some hesitancy by others to, take these things that we're putting a lot of resources behind. So let's talk a little bit about maybe Mrs. Gutierrez, if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about your journey and your child's journey after diagnosis and what that kind of looked like for you and your family.
Okay, well, like I said, every family is gonna face these challenges in a different way, right? Sometimes you start noticing some deficits or that your child is not meeting certain milestones, and you might wonder, right? But when you bring it up to the pediatrician, when it is like the 6-month checkup, right? Sometimes parents, they might say like, well, my child is not bubbling, he or she is not talking, not saying any words, is this an area of concern? And sometimes, because in my case, because we are Hispanics and we speak another language besides English, it was kind of like a brush off, like a don't worry, the child may be confused. Now, let me tell you, we know more about autism now than 25 years ago.
Mhm.
So a lot of progress has been made. But initially, when I saw some areas of concerns and I brought it up to the pediatrician, I was told that not to worry, that language will come and that these things were kind of expected. And some children meet those milestones later on in life. But something in me, kind of told me like, well, we need to look into deeper. And I actually remember going through the school district and requesting an assessment when my child was 2.5. And I could go through that document, right? And even though 25 years ago, almost 25 years ago, I could see now all the red flags that were right there, but even the school missed it. So, I think that like when I'm saying that we know more about autism now, and we look at it with different sets of eyes, even the professionals, they are more willing to look deeper into the concerns of the family, not dismissing them, right? Yeah. And so for us getting the diagnosis, it took us 8.5 years. Mm-hmm. So, but I noticed, reasons to be concerned early on. But again, I was told it's a language delay, the child is confused with 2 languages, go and take some parenting classes, and which we did twice, and nothing was helping. So on that matter, we lost some crucial time, because we know now, because research, that's what it shows us, that the sooner the better that you start working with the individual. We have early intervention. That is critical for these children, to start getting them the resources and the therapy, not only for the child, but for the family as well, to be connected early on. So once we had the diagnosis in California, we have what is called the regional centers. So that is actually the entity that you go for an assessment. And so once that child has been identified, then you become a consumer, a client. And there's these, broad resources that you could have access. It started with parent training. Before even your child could start receiving services, there is the parent training component that I went through. And that was so critical for me because it prepared me to have the knowledge, the basic knowledge. Okay, now I need to know how to ask for questions. I need to know where to go and look for certain resources and how to be connected, with the local community, which I think is very important, because as a parent, sometimes that you feel that, is it my child the only one that is on the spectrum? Are we the only ones, right? And so once my son became a consumer, then there were this range of services that we could have access at no cost to us, and they were available in the community. So that was so important. And then once he started receiving those services, we started seeing those changes, the improvement. So it is critical that families get to be connected early on with resources if they are available, and also being educated, because I tell you that one of the barriers that you are going to see with the families is the lack of the understanding of the disability, researching and locating, accessing those treatments that are evidence-based and what resources we have in that area. And also to try to understand that it's so important to connect the families, because families might be going through emotional changes because of the diagnosis, right? Families feel isolated. All of a sudden, especially when your child starts having behaviors, then you get to notice that your child is not invited to the birthday parties. When they are young teenagers and they want to do typical things that other kids do, like going for a sleepover, well, they never get to be invited to those sleepovers because of the lack of social skills. So the demands on the family, on the emotional aspect, are high, so it's so important that we connect those families with those networks available in the community. Now, if you add another layer to that and think about those families that have no natural support networks, they don't have extended family, no grandparents, no aunts and uncles, no cousins. So it's even more important for professionals, that work with families that have special needs, to try to search for those connections for the families, so that they have that extra support.
Yeah, you got to take care of your needs, or you're not going to be able to take care of your family's needs.
That's absolutely true.
There's a lot of emotional support there that those peer networks can really help you through, where you can lean on other dads or moms for that support. We have an anchor here at Alabama Care, Lane Hagan, who's executive director of Libby's Friends, and he's part of a dad's group through United Ability. And one of the things that he pointed out that I've seen in some of his broadcasts are the divorce rate with families of somebody with a child with a disability is very high. And he said about 80%. And
Parenting stress level is so high.
Yeah. And it causes kind of maybe some cracks in it. The spouses need to be very strong. And one thing that he was saying through that dad's network is they were very proud of that divorce rate in that dad's network was significantly lower than the national average. And that kind of points out to that peer support that these community support networks can give you as a parent. But you have to get connected, as Mrs. Gutierrez, you said, you have to get into the system. And it wasn't until 8.5 years, as you mentioned, that your son was actually in the system. Now, my grandparents had a little bit of a similar thing with their daughter, where they had it in their gut that there was something there, and she needed additional services early on, and the doctors kind of brushed it off. But it looked like, she wouldn't swallow. She was vomiting way too much, small things. And she was the youngest of 3, so they'd had 2 other children before. But did you get frustrated with the doctors, Mrs. Gutierrez, during that time?
I did. And sometimes this is where, as a family navigator, sometimes I educate parents on the aspect that it is okay to question the doctor. I would say that now our physicians and doctors and professionals are more open for family members to actually come and be more involved and taking more an active role. But in my days, when we were dealing with our own child, I remember coming to the doctor with my list of questions. And I would say is this right? And the doctor one time, one of the pediatricians told me, I went to school to study this. I mean, you do not know more than me. I'm like, but I live with my child. I know my child better, right? And so, and sometimes you have to switch doctors. And I tell parents, if your voice has not been heard and you're not being given that opportunity to share and to give more information to make informative decisions, then maybe it's a good time to go and search somewhere else, right? Because yes, there's going to be times where parents will feel frustrated, especially when you keep on coming, we have this issue, and nobody seems to be giving you a way to find some answers, right? I want to add that, families in general, they go through a strong emotional strain, including that they are worried, they have guilt, anxiety, anger, because there is that uncertainty about what caused the disability. What about the future? What are the needs for the other family members if you happen to have other children? And whether or not who's going to be providing the assistance that your individual is going to need, and what about his future? So coming and talking to pediatricians and professionals and finding not finding that they are really listening to you, it could be very frustrating for the family.
Yeah, I've heard similar stories. And you mentioned the emotional weight on parents, especially early on in that diagnosis. It reminded me, the very first interview I ever did was with my grandparents, because I wanted to get to know their story. Wasn't really talked about in the family. And so one of the things that they brought up, my grandfather said, was your son or daughter can have a great life. It may not be the life that you had planned before they were born. It's going to be their own life, but they're going to have a great life. But going through that emotional, part for the family was something that he really stressed. Is important that you're strong during that time. And it can be very frustrating there. So let's get back a little bit to the Regional Autism Network. Dr. Hill, you mentioned there are 5 locations throughout the state of Auburn. They're all at major universities here in Alabama. What if I'm not by a major university? What if I live in a little bit more rural Alabama? Can I still receive services?
Yeah, they need to call us. And sometimes, we tell them, I wanted to say while we're at it, that early intervention piece is so important. And it's not just for autism. If a child has a 25% global delay in any area, they can get early intervention services, and they'll come to the home and do parent training. And at age 3, with a diagnosis, you go into the school system and start getting services there. And then they may not get a diagnosis of autism right away. It may be developmental delay. And they can have that diagnosis until age 9, at which time they either get a different diagnosis or they're released from special ed services because they caught up. And so, so that early intervention is very important. They come to your house, they work with the families, they do parent training, and they're all over the state too. There's Help Me Grow. And that's what we do a lot of times is we get calls not just from people who have children with autism or adults in their family with autism, but a lot of times they have comorbidities. They might have autism and ADHD, or they might have autism and an intellectual disability. And so, we learn something new every day, I think. But we have to connect those families with different kinds of services, depending on if there's more than one diagnosis for that child.
Yeah, I have a question. As we have a waiver system here in Alabama. My family member is on the intellectual disability waiver. Does autism fall under a waiver?
It depends on, go ahead, you go, Maria, you were chomping at the bit there.
It's going to depend on several components, right? So when families have those questions, the first thing that I tell them is like, okay, you need to be connected with this agency, try to see if the child will meet the criteria. So we have a criteria that parents need to meet, or the individual needs to meet in order to qualify for, other services. So for each family, it's going to be different, right? We have to remember that, in order for them to qualify for SSI, they had to meet the criteria, of how much funding the family has, so they look into your income taxes. And so how many family members live in the family unit, so we cannot just say like, yes, I mean, you could access, the Medicaid waiver, because it's going to depend if you meet that criteria.
And the
Yeah,
IQ is tied to it too.
yeah, I've heard that, there are families where the son or daughter test at like a 70 or above IQ, but they have significant things that they need help with outside of just the IQ, and they haven't been able to get those services, and it's been pretty frustrating at that point. So I'm hoping in the future there are additional services to kind of address those needs in the community.
Social skills is the big one. And we were able to bring the peers program from California here to Auburn from an ACDD grant, and it continues to this day. So
I want to give a shout out to ACDD. They're doing some really cool things. They are our grantors. They have helped HTRAN and HTRAN, and they're doing some really cool things. And we have Mr. Daryl Powell, whose birthday was yesterday. In the comment section, he says, this is a great program for the people of Alabama. So on behalf of Alabama Care and RAN and HTRAN, I think we say thank you, Mr. Powell, and all that ACDD has done and continues to do. So we talked a little bit about early intervention there, but does RAN also, is it involved through adolescent and then all the adulthood, those types of things?
it's across the lifespan.
Okay. So as long as we get into the system, so to speak, and one of the flag pole areas, I can be assured that my son or daughter will receive that help and support for as long as they need it.
Yes, but there's things like residential placement is difficult in Alabama. So there are still some pockets that need to be developed.
And I'll say from a provider perspective, I am executive director for a provider, so I'm involved in these provider meetings. We are seeing across the board, it's very hard to hire and retain caregivers. And it's very easy for them to get another job where they're getting paid more, that maybe isn't as physically and emotionally tough on a day-to-day basis. So I think part of that is in helping, as you mentioned, more funding so that we can get more people for longer. So let's talk a little bit about some of the biggest challenges that RAN has in the next 12 months.
Well, we overcame one of our challenges because we did get a little bit of additional funding. And what we are going to do is the Hispanic outreach funded by ACDD has been such a success that we have a YouTube channel. We put our trainings on YouTube. And so each one of the trainings, and we've had so many trainings from IEPs to legal to speech to, we had an OT present, occupational therapist present. We've had sexuality and disability. I mean, we've run the gamut over the last 24 months. And we're going to do a social skills update here shortly. So that when COVID hit, we sat down and figured out, okay, how do we do what we do? Because we couldn't do resource fairs because, well, all the trainings were via Zoom, which turned out to be a plus because when we got the grant for Hispanic outreach, we could provide simultaneous interpretation, which was really wonderful. And so that was overcoming that challenge. And then we were like, how do we get these resources to the families? So Maria we have a listserv now with, I don't know, over
1,000 people.
Yeah. And every couple of weeks, she sends out an email listing all the upcoming trainings across the state. And so that's very exciting. Another thing that came out of it, overcoming a challenge, is we had our Korean families who were saying, what about us? And so thanks to ACDD again and AKEEP in Montgomery, we now can do simultaneous interpretation in Korean as well. And we are also going to hire a part-time, just a couple hours a week, because the community is not as big, but a Korean community liaison who has a child with a disability who can do what Maria does for our Korean speaking families.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's still lots of challenges, but,
So
now
some of those,
we're getting back out and we're able to do trainings. We're going to start hopefully doing coffee chats again. And the nice thing with the HTRAN and RAN, we kind of like meshed them. If we do a resource fair with our RAN information, we also have flyers in Spanish and Korean, and we provide all that upcoming trainings for our Spanish speaking families. So it has actually been a nice blending. Is that a good way to put it?
yeah, it's perfect. And it sounds like some of those obstacles are a little bit in the outreach and letting families know that these resources are available, getting them into the system there. I'd like to applaud 1,000 email, listserv, getting families involved that way, Mrs. Gutierrez. I want to stick on HTRAN a little bit. Mrs. Gutierrez, if you could talk a little bit more about HTRAN, how that came to be, and then, some things that you've learned along the way and implemented some changes.
Well, I have to say, Alex, that, this was possible because Dr. Hill was looking for a way for us to continue doing something during the COVID, right? We were collaborating with the Autism Society of Alabama, providing some short videos, information for the families. But, we started noticing that we have a large Hispanic population in Alabama. And unfortunately, not all the materials, educational materials, are in Spanish, right? So I found myself many times when somebody will call me that their first language is Spanish, I'll have to refer them to outside the state agencies for education purposes, right? So we have a connection with the Mind Institute in California, so I always was referring families outside, but we sat down together and Dr. Hill said, well, let's look about what can we do. And the opportunity for developing and accessing the grant with ACDD was there, and we submitted it and it was approved. And so that's how we started providing the language access. And we noticed right away, families started coming in and telling us, can you guys now present on this topic? We want to learn about sexuality. And you have to understand that for Hispanics and for Koreans families, we have to take into consideration the cultural aspect, right? So it's so important to always be mindful about the culture and trying to have that in mind when you invite a presenter and see, well, how can we present this and this information for the families? And so we decided, to have the option to have the simultaneous language access. And it has been great. It has been great because it has been very well attended. We have had families coming from Mexico, from Illinois, from Texas, from Florida, from even
Georgia.
Yes, Georgia. And so people from outside Alabama are attending these Zoom educational programs that later on, that turns and becomes a phone call, a follow-up phone call, like, okay, well, I attended this program and I live in Illinois. Do you know where should I go? And so it's trying to connect the families now. Now, believe me, I do not have all the connections and all that through the United States, but sometimes it's a matter of trying to go and do a little bit of extra work and trying to Google, make a phone call and say, I have a family, I'm in Alabama, but this family is in Illinois. Where should I tell them to go? And so it's doing that part as a family navigator, like once again, connecting the families with the resources that they need.
I feel like that could be a national hotline for each language and culture, has its own hotline. Hey, I'm in Michigan. Can you help me navigate this type of thing? I when you say, you're getting calls and people are reaching out from all over the country, all over the world. It's amazing that
I did get a call from Afghanistan once.
What was that like, if you don't mind me asking?
It was actually a military, I think it was a lieutenant colonel. He called me and his son was in Montgomery with the mother, and he wanted to ask me some questions because he, so that was it was interesting.
it's really cool once you start to put this content out on the World Wide Web and everybody has access to it. We have a number of followers at Alabama Care from India, especially on our Instagram, that love interacting with the content. There's some wheelchair sports activities in India that frequently share stuff, or we'll repost their stuff. And it's really cool to see that. As you mentioned, sometimes you can feel isolated at points, but to know there is a global community. Mrs. Gutierrez.
I just wanted to add, that a couple of people from Mexico, teachers, elementary teachers and middle school teachers have reached out to us because they have attended these programs. And it's because there is no many opportunities for professional development back, on Mexico or other part where they are, on the region that they are. So they see this as a good way for them to learn more. And it's probably something that there is still not available, in Mexico. So we have had a couple of professionals attending, from Mexico, from different parts of the country. And like Dr. Hill says, from outside, Alabama for sure, and the United States.
Yeah, as I mentioned, I think it could be a national thing. And I have to say, I am guilty of not giving attention to other languages. It's not something that I have had much experience with. Now in Phoenix, I will say there was quite a bit of Spanish speaking, but I don't know why I haven't thought about that with Alabama Care as much. My question is, and I've never tried this, we get kind of lucky with closed captioning. Now we do things through Facebook, through YouTube, and those platforms provide that automatic closed captioning. Sometimes it can be off, but what have you. But does YouTube allow for closed captionings in other languages?
It does. You have to select the automatic, and so, but it's pretty close to the actual language.
Yeah.
So it does give you that opportunity.
But the terminology that is not always match.
Yes.
Yeah. There can be a loss of translation there.
Right. I was going to say, when the one thing the Regional Autism Network gave us when COVID started was when the ACDD grant came out for Hispanic outreach, and that's a statewide grant. That's not just our region. We were like, okay, we can do this. We're like already built for this. So especially with Maria as the family navigator. So I started Googling, where do Spanish people live in Alabama? And there are communities across the state that have high numbers of Spanish speaking people. So I started calling chambers of commerce in those counties to find out what resources were there. And they connected me to resources in those areas, like Franklin County is one. And so I would talk to those resources. They would say they would be happy to provide a letter of support, and they would love to be on our listserv because then they can know what's going on statewide. So yeah, it kind of helped us grow, I guess you'd say.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mrs. Gutierrez.
He provided us with an opportunity for us as a RAN to learn about what other organizations were out there that we were not even aware, like HICA, that is a Hispanic coalition for Hispanic population. And so it's about learning about what is out there. And that was one of the things that I kind of saw all across when I moved to Alabama. People do not know what we have out there. People are not familiar with Alabama Department of Rehabilitation Services. They were not familiar with Alabama Disabilities Advocacy Programs. They didn't know about APEC. They didn't know about disability rights. So all these other organizations might be out there, but the families do not know about them. So it's connecting them with them. And then, but then you have the language barrier, right?
Yeah.
That in this case, our Hispanic population has to face in every single day, and our Korean families as well.
I was just going to say, if I may, that it was when I was calling Marshall and Madison County Chambers of Commerce, I found out about HICA, which is a Hispanic Interest Coalition of Alabama. And Maria didn't even know about HICA.
I feel like there are a number of resources out there, but sometimes too much information, it can get lost.
It's like an onion. You've got to peel back the layers.
Yeah. And it's tough to search through that. It reminds me of maybe some families, if they're getting frustrated, say, oh, the state said this and the state can't do this. Well, and it's actually, well, that's your case manager. That's a separate entity. That's not the Department of Mental Health or Medicaid, so there, we have to navigate that and realize which organizations are responsible for these things. It's not just a blanket term of the state or, health or something like that.
But you have to remember, I'm sorry to interrupt, Alex, but you have to remember that, that in the state of Alabama, we are not set up, the system is not set up for the families to have that person that coordinates services, right? So the coordination of services and the navigating falls on the parents. And when you think about the families that are already dealing with a lot of things at once, right? Sometimes we see the parents have 2 jobs because they had to provide for the child. So that kind of limits their interaction and their involvement on the planning or educating to become the best advocate for their loved one.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of times maybe that first step of a little bit of help comes when their son or daughter enters the school system, and we start talking about special education at that point. But most of that falls back on the parents to really advocate for their son or daughter. But it takes a lot of time. I've been in Alabama for 6 years, and this is my full-time job. I'm still learning about things, and it's just a wealth of information out there. I want to talk a little bit about Mrs. Gutierrez. You said you have to meet the family where they are, but also there may be some cultural differences when talking about some of these topics, such as maybe disability in general or sexuality. What are some of those differences that you see maybe between cultures?
Well, every family is going to see disability with their own perspective, their own beliefs. And for some families and some cultures, disability is being seen as a blessing. For other ones, it's like, God gave you this child because they knew that you could handle it. And, so every family is going to be very unique. And because of their personal beliefs, for some families, they might see like there's nothing wrong with my child, so they do not seek that intervention, right? So it's so important for the professionals, the doctors, pediatricians, to understand the background and where the family is coming from in order to help support the family on the educational, right? To improve the life of the person with the challenges, right? In order just to make their life better and to reach out the maximum potential. So, because when you try to bring up changes, and those are going to be involved with the cultural, personal beliefs of the family, you are not going to make any progress. You might lose that family and never see them again. So it's so important to be always recognizing the strengths and the natural supports that the family have and try to work with them.
Yeah.
I'm Hispanic, so I was raised with la chancla, right? That was the way of being disciplined. And so when you have a child with a disability and you happen to be Hispanic, well, the chancla doesn't work, so you have to learn a new way. And then for your family, extended family members, they might tell you, well, why don't you use that chancla, right? I mean,
The shoe,
or
I don't know what a chancla is, but I can tell you, I was raised with that as well.
or a ruler or something, just kind of whip you tush. But, that is very common in some of the Latin American countries. So, but when you have a child with special needs, that doesn't work. So being educated and changing your mentality, how you were brought up, and trying to see, well, this is not the best way. This is actually going to be worst. And trying to educate the rest of the family members so that everybody could be on the same page and helping you moving forward. That sometimes could be a challenge because of that cultural aspect, right? And so it's trying to now to educate grandma, grandpa, the aunties, the uncles, and say like, this is how we're working with my son or my daughter. This is what it works for him. This is what we're trying to achieve, and help us out. Let's have this extra support from the family.
Yeah, you really need that. And you hear about that in certain cultures where you have multiple generations under one roof or close together. And that really helps out early when there's a newborn, and it really helps out late as you get older, and having that family support there. I feel like a lot of times that responsibility of educating the family and learning falls on the mom.
It does, especially because, well, from the Hispanic culture, some mothers stay at home, not that they don't work. I mean, they work probably more. I mean, staying at home is a lot of work, but also, fathers, they had to go out and maybe have two jobs, with COVID, we got to see that there was a lot of families losing their job. And so we saw that there were two families living together because now you don't have money to pay the rent. And so there's all these other components that came up to light during COVID that made us aware about the challenges that everybody was facing, but more certain communities, that the Hispanic community, was being had these challenges, food insecurity, not being able to pay the rent. We have to take under consideration that in Alabama, we have a large population of families that don't have access to insurance, that the children were not born here, but they only have access to emergency Medicaid, and that is to cover only emergencies. But once these children, if these individuals have been identified with that they meet the criteria for autism, well, those families cannot really have access to services under Medicaid. They cannot have access under, they cannot access SSI and other services. So as a community in Alabama, what can we do to help these families?
Right?
Right?
And as you mentioned, that COVID kind of brought to light a lot of those, I'll say, basic needs. The housing, the food, the day-to-day, and that can cause a lot of stress on kind of the leaders of the family and the spouses. And that's where you see other things, creep up, that you have to have that solid foundation where you're not worried every day that what's going to come to dinner or where you're going to be the next day. And how do we as a community help that? I want to ask Dr. Hill, we were going to have another Dr. Christine Drew. I'm going to reach out to her because she was not able to join us today. And I'm going to pinpoint her down, and I'm going to get a one-on-one with her since she wasn't able to here today. But she was going to speak, I think, a little bit more of the clinical stuff that we're noticing here. But Dr. Hill, is there anything that really stands out in the science behind RAN? Some of the stuff that you're seeing?
Well, we know that parent advocacy is very, very important. And in fact, one of the topics, they have an autism conference every year in Tuscaloosa. And I think it was 2 years ago, the speaker was the guest, the main speaker was talking about respite and how important it is. And people don't really think about the research behind parenting stress and the need for respite. And so he did a very nice presentation. And the thing about autism is that it's a low incidence population. It's becoming higher incidence, but it's not like learning disability. There's far fewer people diagnosed with autism. And there's not a lot of big group normed research for autism. So our focus is on what's called single case research design. And so basically you're observing and you're taking data and you're identifying target behaviors that might need to be changed. And then you develop an intervention, and then you compare what happened at baseline to, is your intervention working? Are we increasing our number of math problems that we can do in a minute? Are we decreasing some of our self-injurious behavior? And so to really make it evidence-based, you have to have the do baseline, have the intervention, then go back to baseline. And if you see that drop back to where baseline was, you intervene again, then it's the intervention, not what they had for breakfast. So that's kind of our focus is on single case research design, the research that we do. And that's how Christine got involved. She is an assistant professor in special education, and one of her focuses sexuality and relationships. So So, but she's also a board certified behavior analyst. So, and she moved here from Texas. So she and Maria naturally connected because she was used to working in Spanish speaking families.
Yeah.
So was that what your question was?
Yeah, I wanted to know a little bit more behind the scenes there that you acknowledged. It's funny that all three of kind of the leaders of HTRAN and HTRAN are not from Alabama. I think that's pretty funny. But if you could give us, my girlfriend has 3 children, and one of them is pretty active and is just now in middle school, starting to receive some services, 504 types of things. But what are some examples of assessing and treating challenging behavior in adolescence? And what
Well,
will
you
that
do-
look like?
You have to interview the teacher, the parent, look at the classroom. If the behavior is occurring in school, you've got to look at, sometimes the teacher can be unrealizingly reinforcing the behavior. Like if every time a child acts up, they send them to the office, then guess what? They escape instruction and then they get to go hang out in the office. And so that can be,
They'll just act out so they can get out of class.
right. And if they have an underlying learning disability and they don't want to be embarrassed by being called out to read or something, that can provoke the challenging behavior because they would rather get sent from the classroom and make the peers laugh with them instead of at them. So they get a trifecta. They get an attention from the teacher, attention from their peers, and they get to escape the work. So that's the kind of things we look at. And then we work on changing not only the behavior, but the behavior of others in the environment. Does that help?
Yeah, I never would have looked at it through that lens. I feel like that was a matrix veil that just got unveiled, that interaction, there are 3 things happening there that are satisfying the needs of the student, but reinforcing that behavior in the future.
And timeout is from positive reinforcement. So if a student's going to escape work and you put them in timeout, they'd rather be in the corner where they can, especially if there's other things there that they can engage with.
Yeah.
So yeah, you've got to look at the purpose of the behavior. Are they trying to get something? Are they trying to get away from something? Are they trying to get access to something tangible? Or is it a sensory? Is there something sensory going on? So basically those are the 4 functions of behavior that we're looking for. What purpose does this behavior serve and what is reinforcing it?
So really for any parent, whether your child has been diagnosed with autism in adolescence, you can seek the help of behavioral therapy for your child, and they may give you this other way to look at the situation.
That's why parent training is so important. And I teach a course in positive behavior interventions and supports for classroom teachers. And it's a lot of it is ABA principles, but also use of visual supports, giving them notice of transitions. I mean, there's just a lot of things that can help classroom management in general.
Mm-hmm.
And if I could add, Alex, that when Dr. Hill said that parent training is so important, is because you have to remember that when the parents start, or the teacher reach out to the parents, say, we have these concerns about, your child, this is what we've seen. So they could start the referral process for an evaluation, right? If the student is still in the school age, and then try to get the professionals to come and conduct assessments and see if the child will benefit and qualify for receiving extra support. And then what those strategies start being put in place and those behaviors start decreasing in the classroom is because it's working. Whatever plan was made and developed is working. But now how can we carry that into the household? Because many times parents are seeing the same behaviors in the classroom. So it's the parent education is so critical for families to be able to learn and bring it up and generalize the skill in the house.
We're going through that right now because with her son, if he has someone looking over his shoulder, he'll do the work and do it well. But if he doesn't have that kind of structure, it doesn't get done. So he's doing a lot better in school with some after school stuff. But as soon as he comes home, it's kind of this and that. And I'm saying we have to reinforce these things that he's doing in school because it's working. He needs a little bit more structure than his siblings do, and that's okay.
And you
And
know,
it's-
oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, it all comes down to the power of what we call the reinforcer.
Mhm.
You
And
know, first you finish your work, then you get to play video games. First you finish your work, then you can take a break for 15 minutes and go outside, and then you can come back and do the other 10 problems, something like that.
Mhm.
So that you're incorporating rewards as they go.
And many times, you know, it's about a matter of trying to copy whatever they're doing in the school and having those visual aids, right?
Mhm.
So when families call us and they tell us that they are in these situations, then I tell the parents, well, get in touch with the teacher and see what is working right there. And how can you replicate it at home? Maybe you need to create also a visual schedule, you know, that he knows what happens the moment that I get into the house. Okay, well, I take off my shoes, I put my stuff away, I get papers out, then I have a 15-minute break, and then I sit down to do homework. And it's structuring a space where the child has less distractions. And this is the visual aid that is going to help me. Like I'm going to be working on homework for 20 minutes and then I have another break, right? So it's try to helping the parents to learn along the way and try to collaborate with the teachers and see what actually is working and
The
what is
parents
not.
can also teach the teachers. I will tell you that, because if they're a really good parent advocate, they'll come in. Like I had a military family move to Florida and their daughter had autism, and mom came in and said, she loves horses. She's on a behavior contract. I mean, she told me everything I needed to do, and I worked on it that weekend and got it all set up.
Yeah, and I feel like for me, if I have those time slots blocked out, I have a much more productive day myself. If I can break it down per hour or per half hour, that really benefits my work and my productivity at the end of the day. And Dr. Hill, you spoke a little bit about the reward system. And sometimes we have tried kind of the carrot or the stick. So you're not doing exactly what you need to be doing. Your grades are falling. We're taking away your computer access, your Nintendo access, those types of things. And we're starting to reframe that as in, okay, these are the rewards you get. You get to do
Right,
these.
you can earn it.
Yeah.
That way the onus is on the individual and you don't become an adversary.
Yeah, because eventually we want to remove ourselves, and they have the power within them and the confidence that they are, they can do this. They don't need somebody always looking over their shoulder to do that.
You want to be an ally toward getting things done. You don't want to be the adversary.
Yeah. As Mrs. Gutierrez said, I'm looking for the word, the chakla.
Chancla.
So there was a wooden paddle that was the chakla in my house growing up, and it had to be used one time. That was it. But as we come to a close here, I want to say, are there any success stories from RAN or HTRAN that really stick out to you that you'd like to highlight at this moment? Dr. Hill, we'll start with you.
Well, I think being able to serve families in their own language has been a game changer for us. Bottom line.
I think that's huge, that cultural, we're meeting you where you are. Mrs. Gutierrez.
I would say, Alex, that is after I talk to a family and whatever the family is, whether they are like ready for me to, say like, okay, this is what we have in Alabama. If I were you, I would start here. I make it usually in bullet points and I tell them double check with me. I give them, a book and I tell them, please read one page per night and highlight it. If you have a question, call me back. And it's trying to see how the family start growing on their knowledge, because we get those phone calls about like, my child has never been to a summer camp. Do we have any summer camps for special needs? My child has a sibling. Is there any activities for siblings that have, for siblings that of people with disabilities that they could attend so they could also understand that condition? So I could think about so many families that where they were when I met them and where they are right now they are the best advocates for the children. They come feel prepared, empowered to the meetings, to go to the pediatrician and ask questions. They're taking a more active role, right? And I have a couple of parents that they have actually even going even a step further, that now they are trying to be sitting in a council at the state level. So yes, it's such a privilege to see how the parents grow on their knowledge and how they feel more secure, and trying to always keep it in mind that what they are doing is just being the best advocate for the child, and helping their child also be self-advocates, because once again, coming from the Hispanic culture, you try to to help and almost kind of keep in a cocoon the person with a disability, but it's educating the family like, no, your child needs to be able to, he's going to grow up, he's going to be an adult eventually, and he needs to be able to self-advocate for his own needs and wants. And so it's trying to educate the families, but it has been so rewarding seeing some of the families that I have met through this 3 years, Dr. Hill, is it going into 3 years that I've been the family navigator?
Mm-hmm.
Seeing those families grow on knowledge and feeling empowered.
Can I give an example of that? We were able to go to Birmingham to the public library, and we did our Hispanic outreach training on transition to school. We did it via Zoom, but it was a hybrid, so parents could come. And I think we had 4 parents come, 4 or 5.
I think 5.
And then after the training was over, I brought a laminator and cardstock, and we taught them we brought examples of visual schedules so they could make their own.
Mhm.
But the thing that was really nice, and we could step back, is they became a network.
And they continued that on after you guys left.
Yep. Oh, they were still talking when we left.
And so this is important because once again, I wanted to touch back into sometimes the families have no natural support.
Mhm.
I don't have a natural support. So the other families that I have met, they have become my family support network, right? I know that they're going to understand me. They have been there, they have experienced probably similarities. And so these are the people that I rely, if I have a question, because believe me, I do not know everything. If I have a question and I say like, hey, have you guys ever faced this situation? Then they could say like, oh yeah, I know somebody.
Mhm.
And I'll ask them if I could give them their phone number to you.
I think a lot of the presence that you both have in the community is you're modeling this behavior and this advocacy. You are, people can look and say, yes, they've done these things. And then the community is starting to mimic the things that you have done and incorporate that into their everyday lives. And I think we all need that. If I'm trying to go over a mountain I've never been over, I like to call somebody that's done it before me and mirror what they've done and the mentality that they've done. And you two are providing that leadership and that role model to the community, disability at large, and also to the autism community. And so I want to say thank you, on behalf of the audience for doing that and the movement that you've made in Alabama since coming to Alabama.
It wasn't just us. We are a part of a bigger team.
As we come to a close here, is there anything that we haven't talked about that an individual or a family member or parents could benefit from hearing?
Well, I just want to add that I know that you have a broad audience. You have a lot of professionals, attending these sessions. I always try to add your upcoming events into the listserv into the email that we send. And so if you work with individuals with disabilities and you feel that we could be a resource for that consumer, that client, please give them our information, right? I mean, we would love for people to call us. We want to reach out as many people as possible we can. And we want to share that information that is available in the state of Alabama, whether it is like is there anything for my child that he tends to elope? Okay, how do I make sure that, that maybe he's wearing a device that in case that he elopes, we could find him, right? So that kind of information, we have access to it. So it's about sharing that information. So if you guys have any questions, would like to refer a family, please give us a call, give them our information, and we will talk with the family. We always say like, I send them to us and then we take them and then we start working with them.
I want to go ahead. I'm sorry.
I also want to thank you for this opportunity because like I said, I know that you have a broad audience And I feel that sometimes this is a good way for people to know, because we have gone to places, maybe to do an outreach event, and we meet people that they go like, we didn't know about the RAN, you know, and it's like the RAN has been in existence. So we want teachers, professionals from other institutions to know about the RAN and what we are doing right now. So thank you.
We're going to put your YouTube channel in the chat, so it's easily accessible. Also, the websites for RAN and HTRAN. You mentioned a phone number. Is there a phone number you'd like us to put in the chat?
Yes, so I will send it to you right now. Give me
Okay.
just a minute.
Yep. And Mrs. Hill, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think individuals, families, professionals could really benefit from hearing? Oh, you're muted. I'm sorry. And I think I said Mrs. there. I'm sorry, doctor.
You, after 3 years, you'd think they'd have me trained. Just be an advocate and support families. I mean, professionals, and because sometimes they used to say kids with autism are the result of bad parenting, and that's just not true.
So Alex, I actually entered the link for the Alabama Department of Mental Health, where you could find that flyer for the Regional Autism Network. So just in case that you have a professional that is in the Huntsville area and they're like, well, do I need to call Aber? No, they could actually make the referral and call on behalf of the family, or give the information to the family for the local RAN on the Huntsville area, Mobile, Tuscaloosa, you know, Birmingham, or us.
Perfect. I opened that and it's a good link. So I'll go ahead and put that in chat after we close here today. I want to say thank you once again, Dr. Hill, Mrs. Gutierrez, for being with us and on the Alabama Care broadcast. Fascinated by everything that you guys are doing and the movement of whole RAN in Alabama. So once again, thank you. And we will go ahead and end our broadcast. Mrs. Gutierrez, real quick, we spoke a lot about family advocacy there. Would you like to give a shout out to Pippa?
Yes. So I am very humble and honored to be given this opportunity to participate on a policy making, so that we could provide suggestions for changes in policy for the benefit of people with disabilities. So I am going to be working along with so many other parents and professionals and self-advocates to I don't know what project we are going to be working on, but I'm super excited and I'm looking forward. So yes, congratulations to PIPA and to ACDD and to the other organizations, ADAP, to be involved, because this is how we make changes. Dr. Hill always says that in order to make changes, there are 3 things, Dr. Hill?
4 pieces.
4 things. And those are what?
Legislation, litigation, advocacy, and research.
So, you know,
We try to keep them all juggled over here.
Yeah.
so for me, it's working with the families, which is something that I love to do, helping them to be educating, feeling more empowered. And this is going to be only through education. So if you let me do a commercial, okay, our next educational program is going to be on November 29th at 10:00 a.m. And we are inviting Dr. Alicia Jones from Auburn University, and she's going to be presenting on a topic that we have heard from parents asking us about it. And we were so happy that we found about her, so that she is one of the experts, and she's going to be presenting on auditory processing disorders. What should parents know? Okay, so it's going to be about talking about what is auditory processing disorder, okay, discussing the testing and the criteria for meeting the diagnosis, and what is the rehabilitation process. So this is, we're going to be sending the flyer. We are super excited about this presentation. I know that parents and professionals have been looking forward for this kind of educational program opportunity. So we'll be sending that flyer, and we are excited about continue working with those professionals in the state of Alabama and our parents to help improve the life of people with special needs.
If you send us that flyer, we'll put it out on our Instagram.
Awesome. I will do that.
And send the RAN flyer too.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and.
And the
put it-
HTRAN flyer.
We'll make a little collage.
There we go.
Well, thank you once again. And we always end our broadcast by just giving our cameras a wave, thanking ACDD and Mrs. Gutierrez. I will see you this weekend. Dr.
Yep.
Hill, I hope to see you in the future.
Certainly.
Thank you.
See you
Bye-bye.
guys next time.